black sand, sulfur smoke, a tiny island in the middle of the Pacific, where 70,000 Marines would fight for a place barely 8 square miles wide. Iwo Jima. To the Americans, it was the stepping stone to Japan. To the Japanese, it was the sacred shield of the homeland. For 36 days, the island became hell. Flamethrowers roared, artillery shook the volcanic earth. And beneath the ground, thousands of Japanese soldiers waited in a fortress of tunnels, determined to die rather than surrender. This is the battle where courage met carnage. This is the battle where a single photograph would define a war. In the winter of 1945, the Pacific Ocean was a battlefield of islands. Each captured island was another step toward Japan itself, and each step had been bought with blood. The United States had fought across Tarawa, Kwajalein, Saipan, Tinian, and Peleliu. Now, a new name was about to enter history: Iwo Jima. It was a small island, barely 8 square miles of black volcanic rock, shaped like a crooked triangle adrift in the ocean. Yet, for the U.S. military, Iwo Jima was a key to the war's final chapter. It sat halfway between the Mariana Islands and Japan. Its airfields could host fighters to escort B-29 bombers on their raids, and its flat terrain could serve as an emergency landing site for damaged aircraft returning from Japan. For the Japanese, holding the island meant delaying the American advance, buying precious time for the defense of their homeland. On the island, General Kuribayashi prepared for the inevitable. Unlike many Japanese commanders who favored suicidal banzai charges, he understood that such tactics would only waste lives. Instead, he turned Iwo Jima into a fortress of shadows. His soldiers carved more than 11 miles of tunnels beneath the island. Every bunker, artillery nest, and machine gun position was linked underground, invisible to American planes and ships. Mortars and heavy guns were hidden behind steel doors, ready to fire and vanish. Kuribayashi's plan was simple: let the Americans land, and then bleed them dry. By February 1945, more than 21,000 Japanese soldiers waited in the darkness below Iwo Jima. Some had written final letters to their families. Others carried their own funeral tablets, prepared to die in place. On the surface, the island seemed quiet, scarred by weeks of American bombing. But underground, a silent army prepared for the fight of its life. Far out at sea, the United States assembled one of the largest naval armadas of the Pacific War. Over 800 ships carried 70,000 Marines toward the island. On the night before the invasion, the decks were crowded with young men staring at the black silhouette of Iwo Jima against the horizon. Some cleaned their rifles in silence. Others clutched photographs of wives, sweethearts, and children they might never see again. Private Jack Lucas, just 17 years old, lay awake in his bunk thinking of home. He had lied about his age to join the Marines, and tomorrow he would face his first battle. Somewhere in the darkness, other Marines whispered to each other, pretending to be brave. They all knew the same truth. By the next evening, some of them would be dead. Before dawn on February 19, 1945, the horizon erupted with fire. Battleships and cruisers opened up with their heavy guns, and the earth itself seemed to shake. For 3 hours, shells rained on the island, turning sand and rock into fountains of dust. Marines cheered as plumes of smoke rose from Mount Suribachi, believing the bombardment would crush every Japanese position. But under the island, Kuribayashi's soldiers waited, untouched. As the guns fell silent, the landing craft began their run toward the beaches. The Marines saw the black sands of Iwo Jima clearly now, soft and steep, with Mount Suribachi towering like a grim sentinel. The sea spray soaked their faces as the ramps clattered down. For a moment, there was only the sound of the ocean and the rumble of engines. Then, the first wave hit the shore. and the island began to fight back. The first boots sank into the black volcanic sand at 8:59 a.m. on February 19, 1945. The Marines had expected firm ground like the beaches of Tarawa or Saipan, but Iwo Jima's ash was soft and treacherous. Every step felt like wading through snow. Heavy equipment bogged down immediately. Tanks and trucks spun their treads helplessly as Marines pushed and cursed, all while burdened with rifles, flamethrowers, and packs that seemed twice as heavy in the heat. At first, the landing seemed almost too easy. The Japanese held their fire. Marines advanced cautiously, looking for the enemy they had been told would fight to the death. The air was filled only with the noise of engines and the low hiss of the sea. Some men dared to think that the naval bombardment had worked, that the island had been shattered into silence. Then, at 10 a.m., the island roared to life. From hidden bunkers, pillboxes, and perfectly camouflaged positions on the slopes of Mount Suribachi, Japanese machine guns, mortars, and artillery opened fire in unison. The beach became a death trap. Sand and ash erupted under the impact of shells, shredding men and vehicles alike. Marines fell in clusters, some never even firing a shot. The Japanese had rehearsed this moment for months. Their gunners had zeroed in every inch of the beach. Mortar crews could hit landing craft before the ramps even dropped. Snipers, invisible in their spider holes, picked off officers to sow confusion. Even the tanks that managed to get off the landing craft became targets for pre-sighted anti-tank guns. Private Jack Lucas, the 17-year-old Marine, would become a living legend that morning. Trapped in a trench with his squad, he saw 2 Japanese grenades land near his comrades. Without hesitation, he hurled himself on top of one and pulled the other under his body. The explosions ripped into him, shredding his arm and chest. But he lived. His sacrifice saved his squad, and he would become the youngest Marine to ever receive the Medal of Honor in the entire war. On the beaches, chaos reigned. Marines clawed their way forward using whatever cover they could find. Disabled vehicles, shell craters, and the bodies of fallen comrades. Landing craft kept coming, unloading wave after wave of men into the inferno. By the end of the first day, 30,000 Marines were ashore, and nearly 600 of them lay dead. Yet, the Japanese line had barely budged. The Americans had expected to capture the island in just a few days. On that first night, as Marines dug shallow foxholes in the soft sand and listened to Japanese mortars thump in the darkness, it became clear that Iwo Jima would be a battle of attrition, a fight measured in yards, in blood, and in time. Beneath them, in the tunnels, Kuribayashi listened to the echoes of his plan taking shape. He had lost few men that day. The island was doing exactly what he intended, devouring the invaders one slow step at a time. As night lifted over Iwo Jima, the beach revealed its terrible cost. Burned-out landing craft and tanks lay scattered across the black sand like broken toys. The surf carried in wreckage and bodies, a grim reminder of the price of the first day. The smell of smoke, gunpowder, and death clung to the air. Yet, the Marines had no time to grieve. Their orders were clear: push inland. The second day began with a new challenge: the slow, brutal climb through volcanic ash and hidden fortifications. Every advance was measured in feet, not yards. Flamethrower teams and demolition squads worked in pairs, burning and blasting the entrances to Japanese pillboxes. Marines learned quickly that destroying one bunker often triggered fire from 2 more, as the tunnels allowed the Japanese to reappear behind the Americans. In some sectors, combat was so close that Marines and Japanese soldiers fought hand-to-hand with rifles, knives, and entrenching tools. A single misstep could mean stepping into a spider hole, where a hidden soldier would rise out of the earth with a bayonet. It was here that the flamethrower and the Sherman tank fitted with a flamethrower, nicknamed the Zippo tank, became the deadliest weapons. Marines would crawl forward under covering fire, hurl grenades into openings, and then sweep the tunnels with fire. Some Japanese soldiers died in place, refusing to surrender. Others moved through the tunnels, re-emerging hours later to strike again. The terrain itself was the enemy. Soft black ash swallowed boots and wheels. Marines struggled to dig foxholes that would not collapse. Tanks overheated in the suffocating dust. Every time an aircraft bombed or a shell landed, the volcanic sand exploded upward, raining down on friend and foe alike. By February 21st, the Marines had managed to cut across the island, severing Mount Suribachi from the rest of the defenses. The southern sector, dominated by the 550-foot volcanic cone, had become the primary objective. The Japanese had fortified the mountain like a natural fortress, with caves, tunnels, and hidden artillery pieces peering down at the beaches. Amid this chaos, individual acts of heroism emerged daily. Marine Sergeant Darrell Cole, a machine gun section leader, charged multiple enemy positions after his gun jammed, armed only with grenades and a pistol. He destroyed several pillboxes before being cut down by enemy fire. He would later receive the Medal of Honor posthumously, one of many on Iwo Jima. Each night, the island turned into a place of whispers and sudden death. Japanese soldiers slipped out of tunnels to launch stealth attacks on foxholes and supply points. Marines fired flares into the darkness, knowing that any movement might be the enemy. Sleep came in stolen minutes, broken by explosions and screams. By the end of the third day, the cost was already staggering. Nearly 4,500 Americans were dead or wounded, and the Marines had only secured a fraction of the island. But the path toward Mount Suribachi was open, and the iconic moment of the battle was approaching, the fight for the volcano itself. Beneath the black sands, Kuribayashi still commanded a coordinated defense. His strategy was working. Every Marine that moved forward did so through fire, and every gain was paid for with blood. By the fourth day on Iwo Jima, the Marines were closing in on the dark, looming shape of Mount Suribachi. The 550-foot volcanic cone towered over the southern beaches like a silent predator. Every movement on the sand below was visible from its slopes, and the Japanese defenders used that vantage to deadly effect. Snipers and hidden artillery made the approach feel like climbing into the jaws of death. The task of capturing the mountain fell to the 28th Marine Regiment. Their advance was slow and punishing. Each bunker and cave had to be cleared one by one, often with flamethrowers and explosives. Marines would creep forward in teams, while others provided covering fire. A destroyed cave didn't always mean victory. Sometimes a tunnel allowed the enemy to emerge behind the attackers, turning every gain into a trap. On February the 23rd, 1945, after days of brutal fighting, a small patrol of 40 Marines from Easy Company reached the summit of Suribachi. The men were exhausted, blackened with ash, and tense with the knowledge that any moment could bring a sniper's bullet. But when they realized the peak was finally theirs, they raised a small American flag tied to a pipe. From the beaches below, Marines erupted in cheers. Ships in the harbor blew their horns. For a moment, in the middle of hell, there was hope. Associated Press photographer Joe Rosenthal was not present for the first flag raising, but when a second, larger flag was sent up hours later to replace the first, he captured the image that would become one of the most iconic photographs in American history. 6 Marines straining to raise the stars and stripes on the volcanic summit. That photograph would travel the world, symbolizing courage and sacrifice. But for the men still fighting on Iwo Jima, the flag was not the end. It was only a marker that the hardest part was yet to come. With Suribachi secured, the Marines turned their full attention to the northern sector of the island, where Kuribayashi's strongest defenses waited. This part of Iwo Jima was a nightmare of ridges, ravines, and hidden strongpoints with names that Marines would never forget: the Meat Grinder, Turkey Knob, and Hill 382. As the flag waved over Suribachi, thousands of Japanese soldiers still lived in the tunnels, waiting to make the next miles of advance as deadly as the first. The island's heart remained unbroken. By the end of that day, Marines knew that Iwo Jima was not just a battle of guns. It was a battle of endurance, fought against an enemy determined to die in place. With Mount Suribachi secured, the Marines believed the worst might be behind them. They were wrong. The northern half of Iwo Jima was a fortress unlike anything they had faced in the Pacific. It was a labyrinth of ravines, cliffs, and jagged ridges, all fortified with concrete bunkers and miles of underground tunnels. The Marines gave the terrain names that revealed their experience: the Meat Grinder, Turkey Knob, Amphitheater, Hill 382, each one a killing field. Kuribayashi's plan was now fully revealed. Every ridge was pre-sighted for artillery and mortars. Every approach to a bunker was a funnel into machine gun fire. Marines advancing even a few yards paid in blood. It was war measured in feet. Flamethrowers, satchel charges, and demolitions became the weapons of survival. Marine squads developed a grim rhythm: crawl forward, locate the firing slit, blast it with a flamethrower, and toss explosives into the hole. Sometimes silence followed. Sometimes the bunker roared back to life from a connected tunnel, forcing the process to start all over again. On February 26, 1945, the 4th and 5th Marine Divisions assaulted Hill 382, the highest point in the northern sector. It was the centerpiece of the Meat Grinder, defended by a network of interconnected caves and fortified positions. Progress was measured in single digits. Marines could spend a full day advancing less than 100 yards. The Japanese fought with an unbreakable resolve. Many soldiers waited in silence for the Americans to pass, emerging behind them to strike in close combat. Banzai charges, so common in earlier Pacific battles, were rare on Iwo Jima. Kuribayashi had forbidden them, choosing instead to bleed the Americans slowly, invisibly, and relentlessly. The cost for the Marines was devastating. Casualty rates climbed to levels that shook the Corps to its core. Entire rifle companies were reduced to a handful of survivors. Medics worked in the open under fire, dragging men to shallow foxholes as artillery chewed the ground around them. Amid the slaughter, acts of heroism became routine. Pharmacist's mate, second-class John Bradley, a Navy corpsman, ran through gunfire repeatedly to treat the wounded. He was one of the men immortalized in Rosenthal's flag-raising photograph, but here he was simply a savior to the dying. By early March, the Marines began to gain control of the Meat Grinder, but victory came at a nightmarish cost. Casualty figures surpassed 20,000 for the Americans, including dead and wounded. The Japanese defenders were being crushed, but Kuribayashi still had hundreds of soldiers in the tunnels, refusing to surrender. At night, the island belonged to ghosts. Japanese raiding parties crawled from hidden exits, knifing sentries and sabotaging supplies. Marines slept with their rifles in their arms, knowing that the enemy was never truly gone. The Meat Grinder had earned its name. For every ridge taken, for every pillbox destroyed, the Marines left pieces of themselves in the black sand of Iwo Jima. And still, the final confrontation with Kuribayashi's remaining force was yet to come. By mid-March 1945, the island of Iwo Jima was a scarred, smoking ruin. The Marines had clawed their way through the Meat Grinder, seized Hill 382, and reduced Kuribayashi's network of tunnels and fortifications piece by piece. But the battle was not yet over. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, the architect of the island's defense, still commanded a shrinking force of roughly 1,500 men. He knew Japan had already lost the island strategically, yet he refused to surrender. To him, every American casualty delayed the assault on the Japanese home islands. His final orders were grim: fight to the death and die where you stand. The last days of Iwo Jima were a descent into darkness. Marines moved through a landscape that barely resembled an island. Every ridge was cratered. Every bunker stank of death. The Japanese had retreated into the deepest parts of their tunnels. Smoke, rot, and the cries of the wounded filled the subterranean chambers. On March 25, 1945, Kuribayashi launched his final act, a desperate nighttime counterattack. Under the cover of darkness, approximately 300 Japanese soldiers slipped behind the American lines. They struck supply depots, airfields, and command posts with rifles, grenades, and bayonets, killing over 100 Americans before they were hunted down. By dawn, nearly all of them were dead. Kuribayashi himself likely died that night or in the final hours that followed. Accounts differ. Some say he led the last charge, others that he died in his command post. His body was never conclusively identified, a fitting end for a man who chose to vanish into the island he had defended with such ferocity. When the battle was officially declared over on March 26, 1945, the cost was staggering. Of the 21,000 Japanese soldiers who had defended Iwo Jima, only 216 were taken prisoner. The rest were dead. The United States had secured the island, but at an unthinkable price: 6,821 Americans killed and over 19,000 wounded. It was the only battle in the Pacific where American casualties outnumbered the Japanese survivors. And yet, Iwo Jima served its purpose. The island became an emergency landing site for over 2,400 B-29 bombers in the final months of the war, saving the lives of an estimated 27,000 airmen. Strategically, it justified the sacrifice. Emotionally, it left scars that would last a lifetime. For the men who survived, Iwo Jima was a place they would never forget. The Black Sands had swallowed their friends, tested their courage, and shown them the extremes of human endurance. Even decades later, veterans would speak of the island in hushed tones, as if the ghosts of their fallen brothers still walked the ridges and tunnels. The photograph of the flag on Mount Suribachi would live on, becoming a symbol not just of victory, but of sacrifice. Iwo Jima was not just a battlefield. It was a cemetery, a crucible, and a lesson carved into history with blood and fire.